Good morning. Welcome everybody to our Monday live. We've got our typical cadre here. We've got Eric, Paul, and Ian, and myself. Today we're going to touch on a few subjects. Hopefully, get to your questions. So if you have those, please go ahead and throw those in the chat. Again, we are gearing up toward the football season. We're probably not more than a week away from fall camp starting. Once fall camp starts, obviously the information starts piling in at a much different rate. We invite you to come to InsideTexas.com, see the information we have there for you. We've obviously got a special going on right now. If you type in IT1, your promo code, when you're signing up, we're going to give you 2 months for $1, which is I don't know if you can beat that deal. You're getting all the fall camp going in, probably even the second, maybe even after the second game of the season. So check us out at InsideTexas.com. Get 2 months for $1 by putting in the code IT1. For those of you that have been following us on the YouTube channel, you know that this Saturday, Paul and I broke down his prospectus, which is now available. We invite you to check that out at all good and evil booksellers. You can get that at Smashwords. You can get it at Apple, and you can also get it at Amazon. Amazon will provide you a tangible in your hand copy, which is rare now. I mean, we're doing everything is in binary code. So to get your hands on something that is a little bit more tangible is a great thing to have. Like I said, Paul and I spent a lot of time on the offense breaking that down. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit about the defense. But before we get into that, boys, I know we have a big recruiting event coming up this Thursday. And we've also got some news on a potential recruit. So let's start with you, Eric. Can you let us know what is happening on Thursday? What's the event that is worth noting?
Yeah, it's the annual pool party. It's not the biggest event of all time, but there's going to be some big time names there. Jonah Williams is one I think people care about the most, just because Texas has been in a trailing position for much of that recruitment. At least it seems that way. And the fact pattern suggested. I wrote an update last night that I can understand why people are skeptical that Texas is really in this one. But every time I talk to people behind the scenes, even when I talk to his parents in Nashville, they speak very highly of Texas. And then, obviously he's a baseball player, a very talented baseball player. There's the threat that he'll be drafted and never even play college baseball or football. But when I talk to people in the Galveston area, they say he's very high on Texas. And obviously the addition of Jim Schlossnagle, head baseball coach from A&M, helps Texas quite a bit. Schlossnagle and Jonah have had a handful of discussions since Schloss got the job. And I think Texas is improving its position, and maybe the fact that he's visiting this Thursday is an indicator of that.
When we are, so with this, you said this isn't the biggest event, but it's a pretty substantial event. What generally, in terms of the cycle of things, what is the importance of this pool party? Because in the past we've had some, well, obviously these things are different now, but we've definitely had some commitments come out of this. Where does this fall in the recruiting hierarchy of things?
This is a bonding exercise. They're going to be able to see the team's last workout before they all head to the pool, the team too. So they're going to get to see the culture and how close the players are. The players are quite close, and that recruits tend to gravitate to that. They want to go to an atmosphere that's inviting, that's competitive, but also that's fun. And that's pretty much, this is going to highlight that. You've got Javian Osborne, one of the top, maybe the top running back in the entire 2026 class, is going to be in town. Michael Terry, the top athlete in the 2025 class. Texas battling Oregon there, and everybody's going to get shivers there. But there's a number of good prospects. The list is not quite as long and distinguished as it normally is, but that's not a big problem. It'll still be fun to cover.
Is this an event where families come, or is it just the players?
No, oftentimes family, friends, families typically come. You can't just recruit the kid. You got to recruit the parents. Anytime you get the parents on campus, it's just as big as getting the player.
We've got this going on, and then obviously we've got fall camp starting in about a week. And one thing that we were talking about a little bit in advance of the show was just the schedule, right? I mean, fall camp is going to lead us all the way up into game prep the week before the Colorado State game. So I'm wondering, for those of us in the world that aren't totally familiar with the basic fall camp schedule, what should the players expect? What should the fans expect as fall camp gets kicked off? And maybe if you can also highlight, Eric, the differences between what is going on in a fall camp versus obviously the week 1 prep going into a game?
Yeah, I mean, fall camp is going to be, it's typically Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Saturdays you'll have scrimmages oftentimes after they get into it. The first couple of days are going to be, not in pads. They're going to make sure everybody's moving around right. You got to be out of pads, I think, the first 2 practices. The main difference between August camp and fall camp is August is more about install, picking up where they left off in the spring, juicing it up a little bit. Hopefully we start hearing some things about a dime package. I'm not so sure based on what I've been talking to you lately. I know Paul and Ian are waiting with bated breath on a dime package, but they're going to do more install. Game week is going to be more in particular of that week's opponent. They'll be on their game schedule that they'll have throughout the whole season. Go to the hotel on Friday as a team meals. Sark likes to get in a very consistent and replicable regimen week to week. So that last week before the season starts will be different than fall camp. But people need to go to Inside Texas. We chronicle it better. There'll be a practice report after every practice. You're going to know what the team's doing as the team is doing it.
One of the questions, and again, we invite you to please throw those questions into the chat. Super chats are going to be guaranteed to be answered, or well, at least posited. So what we're asking here is, this is from Roaster. Do they have any scheduled open media sessions yet for fall camp? Have they released any of that information?
No, it's a little early for that. They like to catch us by surprise and do it kind of late. The SID office will send us emails a day or two in advance. There's going to be an open practice. I'm sure there always is. Media will have a certain availabilities, but honestly, we don't like those availabilities. We want it closed off and quiet as possible. It drives the value of a subscription Inside Texas, where we have unparalleled information.
So Ian, moving into, and we've obviously the running, I don't want to call it a joke, but the running sentiment has been that dime package. I mean, what would you be looking for in a fall camp? What would you want to see?
It's hard to see the things like the dime package. Eric can usually hear about things like that from sources, but I mean, if they really have something that they're working up, a lot of times they keep it pretty well hid till the season because they don't want to advertise it, right? And it's not like they put shiny new schemes into open media sessions generally, if they can help it. But what I think one of the big things to be looking for is we have this probably safely assumed strength of pass offense of this team because you have Ewers back, you have Banks back. We assume Cam Williams will be pretty good. And then we have all these transfer receivers that seem like safe bets to be really good. But then you have all these pass rushers and defensive backs on this team that could be very good as well. So you have this potential strength on strength, and we're going to be playing this zero-sum game all fall until they play real teams of trying to guess at, is this passing offense really as great as we think it's going to be? And if it doesn't appear to be, is that because this pass defense is actually really good? Or, just trying to sort all that out is going to I suspect, occupy a lot of mental space of us message boarders over the next few weeks. But this year, I can actually be there in person to watch some of these practice sessions that they make available. And hopefully I'll be able to suss it out a little better.
Paul, we talked about this on Saturday, obviously focusing on the offense. It's hard to imagine, given how prolific Sark has been and the evolution of this offense, being able to bring the entirety of the playbook to bear. I guess my question here, Paul, is what would need to happen for us not to have a better offense, or at least on par with what we had last year? I mean, I think a lot of people are just taking that as a given, that it's just immediately going to be this way. But there are, as Ian pointed out, there are going to be some variables in there that could contribute to that. And what are those variables? What are the things that could contribute to maybe us not having the evolution that we might need in year 3?
So that's a great question. I do have to address the solemnity with which we discussed a college pool party to begin this podcast. Breaking it down. Will it look like the Do What You Like video from Digital Underground, or will it look more like
the absence of women? The absence of women explains the solemnity.
That's exactly right. It's that always is a strike against any pool party. But I think So here's a couple of things that leap to mind. One would be the right side of the offensive line doesn't progress or come along quite the way we want. I'm referring to Cam Williams and DJ Campbell lined up side to side. That's a side of the offensive line that I'm counting on, not only to play well in general, but also maybe to provide a little more oomph and a little more push in the running game. Maybe in the red zone, maybe in short yardage, we become a right-handed running team. And if they can't come through the way we want as pass protectors and as difference makers in the run game, I think that would be a little strike. Quinn Ewers leveling up. If he's not able to be better against the blitz, you and I talked about that, how Ewers is a contextual quarterback within his wheelhouse. He's the best quarterback in college football. Outside of his wheelhouse, Quinn Ewers is a college football quarterback. So I think if he doesn't progress a little bit against the blitz, because we're going to have 3 or 4 big games where we're playing blitz mad defenses that if you don't handle the blitz well initially, guess what? They bring more blitzes. So that's another aspect. Another part on offense that could set us back potentially would be a lack of definition or roles in the wide receiver core. But I think that's probably the least likely of the 3, because I think Sark's going to firm up who he wants doing what in what positions pretty early. And I think they're going to figure out who our best slot is, who our best move guy is, who our best outside guy is, etc. And then he'll figure out which mixes and matches make the most sense. You guys will recall that we did line up both A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy in the slot multiple times last year. Ian and I actually talked about this because they were hunting specific matchups. One of the things that teams like to do in the SEC is no different. I actually comment on this specifically in each team we play in the prospectus in my football preview. Available now at Smashwords, Apple, and Amazon. That if a team has what I call a big nickel, meaning a big guy who's 205, 210, 215, and they're playing that nickel position, that guy's there to support the run and also play sort of a shallow coverage. He's got help over the top. Well, what Sark likes to do is line up a Bond or a Golden in the nickel, in the slot over that guy, clear out that guy's help behind him with some clever routes and some clever scheming, and he exposes that guy on an island one-on-one, and it does not go well for that guy. So anyway, a little meander there for your question, LC, but I would say right side of the offensive line, quarterback. We would love to see Hayden Connor level up as a run blocker. He is a plus pass blocker. He's a top 10% at his position pass blocker. I'd say he's right in the fat middle of the bell curve in the FBS as a run blocker. And when you realize we're including a lot of teams there, not in the SEC, that's something he needs to level up. So there's my long-winded answer.
We've got some, and I want to stay on this. Thank you, Football Junkie. You've given us a super chat, and I promise you we'll get to that. It's a great question that I'm sure these boys will have a definitive opinion on. But because we're talking about the offense, I want to stay on that side of the ball, specifically with personnel packages. And this is a question for both you and Paul, Ian. But what are some personnel packages outside of 11 and a 12? That would make sense this year for this offense? I know that we've commented a lot on Sark's affinity for the Mike McDaniels offense and some of the schemes that he's running. I'm curious what you think and how we can answer this question specifically to do with personnel packages.
I think 11 and 12 is actually going to encompass quite a bit because they have some versatile guys like Amari Nyblack, and Juan Davis that are essentially like big receivers. I think they may have different versions of 11 and 12. They may have an 11 that's very pass heavy where you put a Juan Davis or an Amari Nyblack at tight end. You may have a traditional one with Gunnar Helm as the tight end. Probably have 12 personnel with Gunnar Helm and then one of the receiving tight ends, 12 personnel with Gunnar Helm and a extra offensive lineman playing tight end. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot that's encompassed just between 11 and 12. But then they're definitely going to run more the pony package stuff where they play with 2 running backs, get both Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter on the field. Those guys have very complementary skill sets together because Jaden Blue can function almost like a receiver because of his versatility and his speed. And Baxter has some size and heft for blocking and playing between the tackles. So, I mean, just with 21, 11, and 12, they may have like 3 or 4 versions of each one. So, yes, but they'll have some other things. But I mean, they have all kinds of variety they can get into.
Any thoughts on this, Paul?
I was going to say that Ian nailed it. The one we'll see the most out of, other than 11 and 12, would be 21, which is 2 running backs, a tight end. I think that could be interesting. We do some interesting misdirection stuff with that in the running game, and it's a good way to also take advantage of both of our running backs as pass catchers, because both Blue and Baxter are plus pass receivers out of the backfield. So I think it's going to be mostly 11 and 10, and even when we're in 11 and 12, mostly though when we're in 11, as Ian said, we'll see different permutations of it. So there may be 11 personnel, but the formation could be, it looks like 4 wide, right? We might have Amari Niblack lined up sometimes out near the boundary. Sometimes we'll put the tight end out there just to see what matchup it draws. So yeah, we're going to stay within that wheelhouse, but within that, I think you'll see a lot of different little permutations of personnel and what they're trying to do with it.
Any thoughts on the on an Agbo fit in, how he might fit into this?
Agbo is in an interesting position. Obviously, he got about 150, 175 snaps last year playing the big tight end position. I think he'll reprise that role in some goal line situations potentially. But as far as an every down player, I think he's probably not going to be a guy that's going to be counted on as the third offensive tackle. At least that's my read. I think he needs to put on a little weight probably.
Let's get to this super chat from Football Junkie. We really appreciate you throwing these out there. They really do help support the channel and allow us to spend time away from our families. So this is specifically this is a bit of an overview question, because there's a couple things that happened with the announcement of the all SEC team that I think are worth noting. But I'm just curious if you boys, let me bring this up for you, if you guys have any thoughts on the all SEC team going in there. Obviously, Quinn is not a first teamer in that particular ranking, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts. Football Junkie wants to know if there were any surprises for you guys.
I've got a couple. Just jumped out. I saw Cedric Baxter on the number 2 offense. I think that might be Jaden Blue. But we'll have to see. I think Cedric's obviously going to carry the ball a lot and have a huge impact. But I think on a per play basis, Jaden Blue may have the bigger impact and maybe the bigger. I think he might be potentially the most dynamic weapon on the offense, sort of pound for pound. And then I didn't notice Alfred Collins on the first, second, or third teams. There's no shame in that because the SEC has a lot of good defensive linemen. But I think Alfred is good enough that if he plays well and really gets after it, I think he can be a second team all SEC kind of guy inside.
Any
thoughts from you guys on that? Anything for you, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting on Cedric Baxter, CJ Baxter. Saban mentioned him the other day when he was talking about how electric Texas's offense could be. He didn't mention Jaden Blue. Then you see the SEC ranking or all SEC team exclude Jaden Blue too. I think that this is the value that we provide as people behind the scenes. That, like everybody, we're all expecting CJ Baxter to, he's going to get his carries, but Jaden Blue is the game breaker that can score a 90-yard touchdown on a moment's notice. So that one surprised me. I don't think that it really captures the fact that there's going to be virtuous cycles between the offensive line, the quarterback, and the wide receiver. I've got sources that aren't even sure that Isaiah Bond's going to be the top wide receiver on the team. But all 3 of them could be within the top 10 rankings. I wrote top 10 players on the team based on inside sources this morning, and I had Bond in there, but that source said it could be any one of Silas Bolden or Matthew Golden as well. So there's just going to be so many potential breakout players on Texas, especially once the offense hits on all cylinders. I don't have the concerns of them not meeting their capabilities this year. And I think they're all going to make each other better. Maybe individually, there's going to be some players that are better than them. However, they're not going to be in the same environment to succeed that a lot of these Texas players are going to be in.
This is obviously, these are preseason rankings, and I think what you guys are pointing out is obviously the things need to happen on the field. Is there anything in particular, Ian, that strikes you with a list like this?
there's always, I mean, this is what Eric was just alluding to, but there's always up and coming guys that don't get votes because they're up and coming and people don't know about them yet. I actually voted on that list at SEC Media Days, and it actually warns you before you try to fill out the ballot. It's like, hey, you have to fill this out quickly or it'll time out and you'll lose everything. And so the whole process does not encourage careful reasoning and research. I will tell you that my ballot is garbage and that I put very little effort and thought into it. And I imagine that the same is true for many of the other people that filled it out. All the beat writers, you know your own team, and you're like, well, this guy's going to be there. But then your up and coming guy, you even had to like try to type in his name to get him to come up as an option. The options it gives you are all the established guys. And sometimes when you search for a guy, it didn't even come up. So, I mean, the whole exercise is completely useless.
So when you're going through this, Ian, and you're using the search mechanism, who were you searching for? Who were you wanting to add that wasn't available to you on a drop-down menu?
See, I don't even remember. This is how quickly I blazed through it. But I will say that this will maybe not be of great interest to our listeners, but Georgia has this guy named CJ Allen at linebacker that's supposed to be the next guy in the Roquan Smith, Nakobe Dean tradition, like insanely fast, up-and-coming guy. And they like him so much that they let a really good linebacker transfer to Kentucky because they knew that Allen would replace him and potentially be better. And the way Georgia and Kirby Smart operates that defense is very, like, the linebackers make all the plays. The defensive line eat blocks and take up space, and the linebackers get all the glory. So, I mean, there's going to be guys like that. The next Tennessee wide receiver who gets isolated on their scheme. The Alabama wide receiver that Kalen DeBoer is drawing up his plays for. Those are the guys that are going to end up being on the list that matters at the end of the year. And they may or may not be known to the media or available on the ballot at this point.
I know that Paul's got some questions from the board at InsideTexas.com, but we wanted to take this opportunity to thank today's sponsor. She's been helping us out throughout the off season, getting us ready to go into fall camp in the season, and that's Laura Baker. And if you're looking to buy or sell your home in the Central Texas area, please reach out to Laura. Laura's a UT grad, avid Longhorn fan, and she's a member of IT. So please help her out. She's an elite member of the Andy Allen team with Keller Williams. She helped our very own Ian Boyd in his process of moving from the Great White North down to God's country. So if you are looking to buy or sell your home, please give her a call at 512-784-0505. Again, that's 512-784-0505. Paul, I think you had some questions from the board. If you wouldn't mind bringing those in, I'd appreciate it.
I do. Question for you, gentlemen. Let me pull it up. I teased it, and now I'm teasing it even more to build the suspense. All right, from MG Bull X5. I'm not sure if those were Roman numerals or
just the handles are great. I love it.
Who do you see as a potential quote unquote trap game this year?
Oh, all right.
All right. And so the team that leapt to mind for me was there's a team that falls on the schedule right after the road trip to Fayetteville, which could be emotional. Who knows? And then right before Texas A&M, which we know is going to be a big game, and it's Kentucky. Yep. We play Kentucky here at home. And I think every Longhorn has that penciled in as a W, or probably permanent marker sharpied in as a W. But I'm telling you that Kentucky, if their quarterback hits Brock Vandegrift, that could be a team that's going to be a tough out for every team in the SEC that plays them. They've got really good wide receiver talent. They have the best defensive tackle in the SEC in Deion Walker. They've got a really good cornerback. Mark Stoops coaches a good scheme on defense. They don't give up big plays. You kind of have to move up and down the field and earn it. They're about one pass rusher in addition to Walker and a nickel, and their quarterback playing well. Brock Vandegrift, of course, the transfer from Georgia, who couldn't beat out Carson Beck. Probably no shame in that. If those guys pan, Kentucky's going to be a real problem for people, and they kind of match up decently with us. So that would be my answer. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I said Kentucky the other day on the board. That's the one that makes the most sense. That's a good, solid SEC team that's not going to beat itself. They're going to run the ball on you. They're going to be physical, more physical than you expect. They get the big boys, even though it's Kentucky. They're not one of the Georgias or Alabamas. And they're well coached, man. I mean, I can't wait to see Kentucky and A&M play after they committed the coup on Mark Stoops getting the job.
Yeah.
He's just a really good coach, and that team seems always prepared and physical. They're not typically explosive, but they do have the potential there with Vandegrift and the wide receiver's really good too. That everybody's waiting for that guy to go in the portal the last couple of years. It's going to be a fun game, but Texas is going to have to come prepared. I think part of their losses last year was they weren't quite as focused as they should have been, and they got outplayed. The potential exists in that game as well.
I would obviously there's at Arkansas and at Texas A&M. I think you wouldn't necessarily call them traps at this point because everybody knows that those are going to be crazy atmospheres. But if those teams struggle during the season and they don't look so good, it could sneak back up on Texas, and then you go there and it's like a different team than you'd seen. The other one, I mean, Kentucky's the right answer, but the other option would be Florida at home. How many games has Florida played at that point? Like 6 games or something? They could be like 2-4 and kind of limping in, but they are a much better team than it looks. And maybe they still have some fight left, or maybe they just switched to DJ Lagway unexpectedly on Texas. That one could be a surprise game just because they may be a lot better and deserving of more attention than they actually get at the point where Texas plays them. So
Ian, here's the tough thing about poor Florida. The week before they play us, they play Georgia. The week before that, Kentucky that we just talked about. The week before that, Tennessee at Tennessee. And then the 3 games immediately after us, LSU, Ole Miss, and at Florida State. So needless to say, the Gators will not be stealing any extra prep for Texas, which is one of the things I've been trying to reinforce to the board. I even wrote about it in my preview that I understand Texas fans are used to being the game on the schedule that everyone has circled. Remember that the guy famously did the research on fans and who they consider their rivals. And 11 different schools said Texas was their number 1 rival. The number 2 runner-up was 3. Like that's how much Texas was obsessed in the Big 12. I mean, it was kind of a surprise for us to find out last year that Iowa State's players considered us a bigger rival than Iowa, right? I mean, that was a shock to me at least. So one thing, yes, Texas will be a big game. Yes, people do want to beat Texas. Yes, people do want to welcome Texas to the SEC. But you got to realize Florida is not thinking about Texas at all. They're thinking about Georgia. They're thinking about Tennessee. They're thinking about LSU. There is no extra prep in August for the Texas Longhorns at Florida or at Kentucky. They got other stuff on their schedule to worry about. When they play Texas, they'll want to beat us and they'll give us their all. But they ain't doing this like, let's run our spring practice 3 days on just Texas stuff. That's a thing of the past.
See, Paul's already setting the trap.
I'm already setting the trap. That is the key to a trap game is I set the trap of overconfidence. See?
Well, I think there's also a lot of overconfidence when people don't throw into account that Texas is 8-3-1 all time against Vanderbilt. It's just a statistic I want us to all think about as we're moving into the season. 8-3-1. We've got some making up to do, guys.
3-8-1, right?
8-3-1.
That's Vanderbilt's record.
That's Vanderbilt's record against Texas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but we measure all things against Texas, so it's 3-8-1.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm saying they
3-8-1. You're
they lead the series 8-3, guys.
3-8-1.
All right, let's move on to the board here. Let's give Eric an opportunity to chat. It's his favorite thing in the world is to talk on these videos. So let's give him some room to do that. How are you feeling about Houston in this next class? How are they coming on? That's a question from Dennis Donaldson.
Yeah, he's talking about this class, and that's something I wrote about early in the cycle was they're actually going to be a lot more aggressive in Houston. Sark actually telegraphed that a year ago. They were looking ahead and saw that, quite a bit of athletes in the area that fit what they're looking for. There was a couple down cycles in Houston. As much as Houston can be down, there will be NFL players that come out of those down cycles. But this one definitely caught UT's attention. They got 4 guys committed right now: Smith Orogbo, edge, long edge, kind of a Charles Omenihu, but for Buck. He won't grow into a jack. You've got Nick Townsend, who I think is one of the best players in the country, tight end, just a stud, committed last week. You got Caleb Chester, a lead corner, tall guy, could maybe play nickel. And then Cade Phillips, exceptionally athletic and long, safety, might be a corner down the road. He'd like to get the shot at corner. I'm not overruling the chance that he could play corner. He's 6'2", 180 pounds, 21.5 in the 200, 24-foot long jumper, a freak athlete. If he gets his technique refined, he'll be plenty athletic and long to play at corner. So really intriguing. They got a couple other guys they're after. You got, Jonah Williams. I don't know if we're calling Galveston Houston. It looks like Houston if you're down there on a Saturday. So maybe we can go with that. But yeah, it's a good class. 2026 is pretty good too. It's just good to see Texas, going back to the town that really brought them back in 2000s.
This is a personnel question, and I want to throw this to Ian because I know he's talked about this a little bit, and this is to do specifically with Sarkisian's philosophy about player build. We've obviously talked a lot about the big human aspect of things, but what David Keith Williams here is asking is, considering Michael Terry's chances of committing to UT, do you see Sark changing his philosophy about playing bigger wide receivers if Terry remains at 225 and plays wide receiver well for UT? So we discussed this again. I don't want to throw you to other videos, but Paul and I talked a lot about some of the options that we have at wide receiver. And some of them are some you would consider maybe diminutive sized players that can play on the outside. So first of all, the first question is does Sark have a type when it comes to a wide receiver build that he wants? And the second question here really is, do you see that altering at all? From my point of view, he seems to be put the best man on the field mentality when it comes to this type of stuff. But what are your thoughts? Let's start with you, Paul.
Michael Terry's to me, I view him as a pure athlete. And so I don't know where he's going to end up, honestly. I mean, that's a guy who could be 245 pounds, and we're checking in on him as like a dedicated edge rusher or a linebacker or something. Who knows?
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Sark seems to prefer speed. So if you'll remember early in his career at USC was known for having bigger wide receivers. And, they had guys that were 6'3", 220 running post routes, right, for Matt Leinart. And then I think he kind of discovered that, there's a different variety of what I can do with this offense with speed everywhere and moving people around. As far as Terry coming to UT, you got to defer to Chatty Eric on that one.
This was directed at you, Eric. Any thoughts on this? I
mean, Sark will modify his philosophy, but he's not going to change his philosophy just to incorporate a bunch of giant receivers. He's not trying to create a Tom Herman wide receiver room where you have a bunch of big guys that necessarily can't run and separate.
Yeah, I love Terry for this specific class, because I think the case could be made that they should take 3 tight ends, and also they could make the case to take fewer wide receivers. They're actually looking at taking 4. I don't necessarily think they need 4. They know better than me. I'll defer to them. But Michael Terry kind of fits both those. He could. It depends on where his body goes. But if he stays around 220 pounds, they could use him like Jaleel Billingsley, like he used Billingsley, or how they use Nyblack. Or maybe even how Texas used little Jordan Humphrey. Just versatile. Let a skill set and the size dictate where he goes. Don't try to shoehorn him where he doesn't fit. But I think he fits in this class because you can make the case for 3 tight ends with what they're going to lose to attrition, and the fact that some of the other guys that are going to be around next year haven't really proven themselves yet. So I'd love to see him in the class, and I wouldn't rule out wide receiver, but he'd play probably more inside. They want speed on the outside. That's the name of the game. Ryan Wingo's probably going to end up playing at 215 pounds, but he'll be outside, but he's also a 10-5 guy. So it's not necessarily size. It's a speed component. But Terry, like little Jordan Humphrey, played running back has very good change of direction, is going to be a bull to bring down. I can't remember how many first downs little Jordan Humphrey got, even though he was stopped oftentimes 4 or 5 yards before the sticks. I think Terry brings that element of toughness. Maybe you can say that there's some similarities to Jordan Whittington in that regard as far as his usage. But typically Sark likes to get vertical, and we're going to see a much more vertical offense this year with Golden in the slot, Bolden outside, and Bond outside. I think, when you ask what are Sark's preferences, well, look what he puts on the field this year. He went and got those guys out of the portal, all 3 of them. So he's kind of telling us what he's looking for.
Yeah, I'll see the way rules are these days, you can weaponize tiny, fast people in a way that you never could in the past because they're protected when they go over the middle. The cheat motion that they use now, you can get them almost a running start going into the line of scrimmage. RPOs and play action, those tactics these days are more advanced, and that's so like Paul and Eric have saying, the main thing is speed. He's going to play the guys that are fast at wide receiver, and the size is incidental, except insofar as it correlates to speed. I imagine that Ryan Wingo is going to be as big as it gets.
Moving over to, we'll just pop back here. This is from the board. I wanted, this came up about specifically if there's a dark horse, and it's a little bit tough for inside Texas readers because we get a lot of it, obviously, insight on this. So the outside public may think it's a dark horse, but we may have some. So we've been reading about this player for a while, but do you have a dark horse for best fall camp and or season breakout? One individual, and then second, who do you guys think has the highest in-season boom or bust potential among the projected starters? So we'll start with you, Eric. In terms of fall camp, we'll start with that first question. Who do you think is the dark horse for the best fall camp and maybe a season breakout?
Man, I'm going to go DJ Campbell. I like that he's experienced now, and he's had a year for that information that he processed last year to saturate. It's year 3 is when a lot of these offensive linemen break out. Can't compare everybody to Kelvin Banks. I think he's right on time. If he becomes more consistent, less mental mistakes, which you'd expect in his 3rd year, he's got all the physical tools, the athletic tools, the tenacity. Might be the strongest guy on the team. He's one of the rare offensive linemen that would be athletic enough to play defensive tackle. Not to say that would be the best usage of him, but he's got pretty much all of it. Except he's got to put it together. And I think I'm expecting to hear a lot of good things about him in August. And if we hear good things about him in August, guess what? It's going to carry through into the season, and this might be his last year.
Thoughts from you, Ian? Who do you think best fall camp? Who's going to have who do you see as the dark horse player for having the best fall camp?
From some of Sark's comments recently, I think it's Juan Davis. Because it sounds like Juan Davis has a chance to be the primary receiving tight end next to Gunnar Helm rather than Amari Niblack. Maybe that, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe they just want to keep Niblack around so that Arch Manning can throw to him next year. Maybe they're trying to keep Juan Davis engaged. I don't know. But that sounds like that could be the guy that blows up that people are not currently penciling in to have a particularly big role on the team. And then are we moving on to question 2, or do you want to go to Paul first?
I would like to hear if Paul has any thoughts, and then we'll come right back to you for question 2.
There are no dark horses if you're an inside Texas reader. Every player is well lit and illuminated from every possible angle. I think Juan Davis is probably the best answer just because it's not a guy that gets talked about a lot. And he is one of these dudes that people are like, you talk to people in the program, they're like, the traits are there. He just doesn't always seem to know where to run or where to go or what's going on. And once you resolve that, a player gets a lot easier to play in games if they know where to go. So he sounds like a good one. I think Cam Williams, I think people maybe again, if you're an inside Texas reader, you guys know that freaking angle on the number 3 guy on the depth chart at punter. So, it's hard. That's a tough question for us to answer. We're going to move on to number 2 here.
Yeah, let's. Ian, what were your thoughts on the second aspect of this? Who do you think has the highest potential for boom or bust of the projected starters?
Yeah, Quinn Ewers.
Yeah.
He needs to get better from last year, which I anticipate he will. But if he doesn't get meaningfully better, that could lead to some issues. And then he needs to stay healthy. Well, when's the last time he was healthy for a full season? Like his freshman year at South Lake Carroll, maybe. So that's the other lingering big
Does he,
one.
though?
What? Does he need to
Does he,
stay
though?
out? Well, for his sake, he does. For Texas's sake, maybe not.
Do you also have Quinn there? Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I don't think he has a
Eric
bust
agrees.
potential. I don't think that's a bust potential. I think it's more plateauing, right?
Well, but that's the question, right? It's all perception. So is it a bust if there's? I think the point that Ian is making is that if there's not a progression, if there's not some steps forward, that might constitute a bust given his trajectory. Do you agree with that notion?
Yeah, that's a fair. How about Trey Moore? So Trey Moore, you obviously the production is incredible. He's one of the best pass rushers that the group of 5 has ever seen. And his freshman year, we know last year he had 14 sacks and he was the conference player of the year. As a freshman, he had 8 sacks and he was a huge impact player. So, and the guy's gotten great reports. However, if we don't find ways to get him on the field and really play to his strengths, that's a guy we might look back and say, boy, did we really get what we needed out of that guy? Because when we did put him in this situation against fill-in Team X, he had freaking 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, but we didn't even play him 2 weeks before because we were worried about him getting exposed against the run. So it's incumbent on Pete to really open up his thought process that Trey Moore maybe isn't just going to line up at Buck or Jack, or he needs to maybe be incorporated at linebacker. He needs to be incorporated maybe as an overhang kind of guy in certain defenses. So the more we can get him on the field in fortuitous circumstances and situations, the more that guy can boom. Because if we don't get that much out of him, I think that is kind of a bust.
I think Darden has a good one here because we've been waiting on it forever.
Yeah, a fair point.
Now, I think there's no way he came back to get drafted in the 5th round. And I think he's been a little bit more motivated in the past than I think a lot of fans have realized. Kind of like with Juan Davis, but to a lesser extent, he kind of knew he was waiting his time. He played a lot more than Juan, but still had guys ahead of him. I think it's Alfred's time, and I think he's going to have a very big year. But there's always the potential that he doesn't. I'd be surprised if he didn't have a good year. And again, I like Paul's mention earlier of him as a potential second team all SEC. I think he's going to be a 2nd or 3rd round draft pick. So I'm predicting a pretty good year, but it wouldn't shock me if he just had an average season.
We're going to switch over to back to the board with Dennis Donaldson. He's asking super chats. And again, very much appreciate these guys. And this is going to go to you, Eric. I'm assuming this is the framing of the question that he's looking for, but is it typical for Texas to have so many 4 to 5 star athletes in one class? And he mentions Terry, Towns, Jonah, and Lance.
That's just because I think the athlete tag is a cop out. I'm pretty on it. I know where these guys are going to play. So it's not, Jonah's going to play safety. Lance is going to play edge. Townsend's going to play tight end. And Terry's going to be an offensive weapon of some sort. That's the one that you can leave as an athlete tag. Hey, he's played so many positions, and he's still kind of conflicted on where he lines up. So the other guys have a pretty clear understanding of where they're going to play. I think what's interesting is that you've seen a lot of guys that could play edge or tight end if they wanted to. Lance Jackson would be an NFL tight end. Townsend would have a chance to be an NFL edge defensive player. Those guys they're grown men. They're physical and athletic specimens, and they have the right mindset. Townsend has very good football character. So those guys could play those other positions. It's just not what they're being recruited as or where they're going to end up.
What constitutes the athletic tag? Why does that get thrown on to certain players and not others?
It's just their tape. Some of these guys play offense as well as they play defense in high school, but the traits are going to tell you where they're going to go or where they should go. And a lot of times they pick. And I've seen a lot of players pick the wrong side of the ball just because, a lot of them want the ball in their hands, but there's a whole lot of guys like you on offense, but not nearly as many like you on defense. I see that bad decision made all the time. I think it costs a lot of kids money. If you got a guy like Townsend, if you look at the tape, you could be confused. I wanted Lance Jackson as tight end or edge last October. When I saw his junior film, I was like, I didn't care where he ended up, but he wants to play edge. And I think that's the right decision, but I think he would be a really good NFL tight end. I think he'd be an NFL tight end. That guy's a freak. It's just, a lot of times it's their preference. They want to play offense when they should play defense. Jonah Williams could play offense every bit as well as Michael Terry could. He's faster than Terry. He's more athletic than Terry. But he thinks that, if he plays in the NFL, it's probably going to be at safety. So I think he's got a pretty good feel for that one. But a lot of times it's player preference. But it's all too often they're getting fed bad information or just want the ball in their hands when they should be trying to play defense.
This is a video. Obviously, we had Coach go over this, Coach Williams, about when you do get a player in and deciding what side of the ball to go to. How much of that is done in advance during the recruiting process? I mean, presumably the coaches are going in there and they're explaining to the families and the player how they plan to implement them. But does that change often? But when they get on campus at all?
It can. And Texas is very honest. Cade Phillips wants to play corner. That's why LSU was in the thick of it. Corey Raymond was selling them on corner, but Texas says, "Hey, look, we think you're a safety. We're going to let you try corner, but we do think you're a safety." They're going to be frank with them. And then other players, Jatavian Sanders, it's pick what side of the ball you want. But Jatavian's kind of an interesting case where his tape at edge was as good as his tape as at tight end or wide receiver in high school. Now, what we know of him now, tight end was obviously the right pick. What we knew of him in high school, it was a little bit more confused or cloudy. I don't think he's as physical as you'd want on defense. So a lot of times it does get figured out on campus, but typically the coaches are going to have a sell for him, a vision for him. You got to have a vision for him. Even with Nick Townsend, they did say, "Look, man, if tight end doesn't work out, you could play linebacker." And he got to know Johnny Nansen a little bit, but that was more of a fail-safe. I think they're taking a different angle just to make sure that they could get him. But yeah, a lot of times the coaches are going to have a vision for him. And, they'll bend that sometimes if the player is really good. And other times they won't. They'll say, "Okay, look, this is what we think you are." Really, Texas didn't gain a lot of traction with Michael Terry until they said, "All right, we're not really looking at you in defense. We like you as an offensive weapon." And that's when I put in my prediction for him after his official visit. So, yeah, you want the vision for the staff to align with the player. But the player isn't always right. And a lot of times the staff will back off a player if they don't think that they're going to get the most out of him.
But sticking with recruiting, but maybe in a different angle here, we have a question from the board. This comes from NYC Horn 40. And I know Paul was very interested in discussing this because we do talk about culture a lot. And the question is, I know we're all tired of talking about Oregon, but I'm curious to know if and how Oregon is getting ahead of potential culture issues, a la A&M's historic class. And I think the culture issue here is something that you've talked about, Paul, certainly in relationship to NIL deals, payment, things like that. And I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, if you have massive discrepancies in payment and compensation in a locker room between starters and contributors and true freshmen who've never done a thing for the Oregon Ducks or the Texas Longhorns or the LSU Tigers, you foster a reality, a real resentment, a real sense of envy, jealousy. There's a reason these are, some of the mortal sins, right? In according to Catholic theologians, because it leads to a lot of divisiveness. It leads to contention, and ultimately, you're not going to have the basic chemistry that you need to run a football team. You get a lot of prima donna behavior. You get a lot of anger, resentment, and some of those freshmen who are blabbing and they come in the locker room all iced out, they run the risk of getting punched real hard in the face by a 2-year senior starter who came in as a 3-star, and he's making 1/3 of 1/5 of what that guy is making. And so that is always a concern for any coach. I will say, though, that the difference for Oregon is they do have Dan Lanning. They do have better assistants. They do have a better environment. And the thing that people forget about Jimbo Fisher, because you'll see people in the media write about A&M and that contract with Fisher, and they're like, "Well, you can't fault them. They took a swing at it." And it's like, you can fault them. Jimbo Fisher was falling apart at Florida State. Texas A&M gave him a lifeline. When they hired him, he was 5-6 that prior season. The program was self-destructing. They had the lowest APR in all of college football. They were about to be on suspension. They were about to be suspended from going to bowl games because their APR was so bad. They'd had multiple player scandals. None of their players were going to class. They had a bunch of different cheating stuff, and there's boys will be boys stuff, but then there was also some really serious stuff going on at Florida State. The whole program had descended into anarchy under Jimbo Fisher's leadership. And so you bring him to A&M, and then you give them the highest paid roster in college football, particularly that 2022 class, and you expect things to be managed well and correctly? Not at all. They descended into a bunch of prima donnas and goofballs, and I think A&M actually did a pretty good job of suppressing some of the things that were going on there that didn't get out, that people learned about, at least to the popular media. And of course, it all fell apart. So I think the culture that you set does play a big role. But even if you have a great culture, great coaches who are really on top of this, if you have massive discrepancies in compensation between non-performers and starters, you're going to breed some resentment and some ill will. That's just how it is.
We have a question from Roger G specifically to do with obviously the players that we're recruiting and Oregon. But before we get to that, Eric, I'd love for you just to hear your comments on this, because one of the things that has been bandied about quite frequently is Sark's awareness of precisely what Paul is talking about. When we're talking about NIL deals, when we're talking about paying these kids, Texas may have missed out on some players because of this very reason. They didn't want to create culture problems in the room. How would you say, I mean, is it safe to say that this is on the forefront of Sark's mind when they're going into these types of deals?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why he's not trying to, recreate the market with each guy. He's not going to reach and overpay for players that they don't feel is worth it, are worth it. Dominic Williams, who picked OU recently, is a very good example. Yeah, it's definitely at the forefront of his mind, and that's why they really want sort of a universal basic income for each one of their players, so that they can have at least a starting point. And then it's kind of up to them from there. He can make the case that, well, look, this guy's starting, this guy's putting the ball in the end zone. This guy's more marketable. Maybe you should smile a little bit more. Maybe that player's like me, doesn't smile enough on camera. Yeah, that's going to be part of it. So, but if you can get that universal basic income, or for lack for a better term, then I think it's a lot easier to massage. And Sark's been working on that for a long time, and then that's coming. That's going to be part of the whole thing. But he's been cognizant. I mean, that guy, you cannot see a single interview with him and he doesn't mention culture.
And moving on to this a little bit, let's talk about some specific players here.
Oregon.
Do we see these guys leaning toward Oregon, or it is early in the game for these guys?
Yeah,
but what are
your
Ball
is a really, really good running back. And if you watched enough of these lives, you've seen him chime in on these very chats. He'll come in and talk and shoot and BS with us a little bit. That was a Texas lean. Now, what's going on here? I'm not 100% sure if it's on the Oregon side or on the Texas side, because Texas does have two running backs that they're all over. Javian Osborne, some have him as the top running back in the nation. I think that's fair to say. He'll be visiting this week. And then they also like a kid named Amari Latimer out of Georgia. So, this could be a little bit of column A, column B, where Oregon's going all in and Texas is kind of just saying, all right, we like these other guys as well. But Tre'Davious Ball, 10'4", 100, very good build. No surprise that Oregon is all over him. He's an exceptional player, but it is kind of surprising. That kid was jumping in these chats left and right. He was in here every week like David Williams was. And so it's a little disconcerting to see him leaning Oregon. It's more, I would say it's more than just a lean towards Oregon. But, just you don't worry about quarterbacks, wide receivers, or running backs at Texas. They're going to be just fine. You're muted, dude.
You're muted, dude. We're going to check all this stuff out. We invite you to check all this stuff out at InsideTexas.com. Again, use the promo code IT1 for 2 months of Inside Texas for $1. We appreciate everybody chiming in here with your questions. These great questions today. We really appreciate it. Obviously, there's more opportunities to get information from us with questions on the site. Please do that. And again, go to Amazon, go to Apple, go to Smashwords, and buy the 2024 Longhorn Football Prospectus by our very own Paul Wadlington. We very much appreciate everybody being with us here today. We will be here all week with lots of different content, so please check us out. Take care.